content, I wanted to do a quick review slash reminder. First, your professional book study or literature study groups. Just a reminder that y'all are still meeting regularly, discussing what you're finding in your readings and starting to have a plan of how that might be translated into something that you'll present to the class. And by present, I mean something you'll create and then upload so that everyone can see. Um, Keep in mind that that professional book study group product will be due at the end of the semester. So don't feel rushed. Don't feel like you have to get all the readings done right now. Um, right now, you're working weekly on your book browsing annotations and on your discussion boards. Those two things are your constant. But in the background, your two main projects are going to be that 2 week long plan, and as well as the professional book study product. So those are due at the end of the semester, which I'll put some dates up next week to help those of you who need to plan for the second half of the semester of when those are due. Also, just letting you know, I'm still really impressed with what's going on in the discussion boards. Y'all are really diving into details, and your replies to one another are high quality, which, yeah, I teach a lot of online classes, and that's not always the case. I usually have to prod people to say more than just, I agree with you, or wow, you make some great points. Um, I'm very impressed with y'all's capacity to dive deeply into one another's discussion posts and make it sound as if you are in class with one another. So I appreciate that as well. So this recording is going to focus on two things. One, we're going to look at reading or running records again. Yes, again, because now that, and this is week 6, so y'all should hopefully have been in your placements for your clinicals, at least a couple of hours at this point. What I would really like for us to start to look at is for you to complete your own running record with a child in the classroom of the clinical classroom that you were in. So that's why we keep going back to reading records. One, it's just good practice, and two, the more practice you get, the more comfortable you're going to feel when it's time for you to try it on your own. So that's going to be our first focus today. And then our second focus is going to be guided reading. Finally, I feel like we've been building the past 2 weeks to guided reading, but it really was essential that we think about the overall idea of the reading process. And then we get into, well, children who are engaged. What's that look like socially? What does that look like physically? And now we can talk about what a guided reading lesson can look like. Because if those other two pieces aren't there foundationally in a teacher's knowledge, the rest of it just kind of falls through the cracks. So I appreciate your patience and your grace as we dove into some really essential pieces before we get into guided reading. So you can see that I'm using, again, Clemson University's Reading Recovery website. It's a gem. If your colleagues or people that you, classmates that you work with don't know about it, put the word out because it is some of the best professional development that you can get as a literacy teacher outside of just becoming Reading Recovery certified, which takes an entire year. Um, but I'm going to go to instructional decision making. This is where they have their resources, their resources for running record practice. So what I would like for you to do this week, and I'll put the directions in the module and I'll have it all laid out for you, is I'm going to have you listen again to a child, and they pretend to be a child, reading a book, and see how, again, the teacher records that. And this time they're going to use a running record, so a blank sheet of paper, not with the text already pre-printed on it like we've looked at before. And that's an important piece of that. The reason why a running record practice is good too is 9 times out of 10, the book that the child chooses to read to you independently, if you're conferring with a child, or even if you have them for guided reading and they're doing a running record for you, which we'll get to in a moment, you're not necessarily going to have that text pre-printed on a reading record form. Typically, reading record forms are utilized for uh, more summative assessments like benchmarks or DRA or things like that. When you're just on the fly getting information about how a child is reading, you really need to just know how to be able to do it with a blank piece of paper. So that's why we're seeing how someone does that. with a running record on a child. So I'll prepare those directions and put them into the other videos for this week, and provide you all the things you will need to watch that teacher do that, and then you practice as she's doing it on whatever blank piece of paper you want. I'll provide a running record form if you'd like to download it, or if you'd like to digitally annotate. But you could do it with just a plain old piece of paper, and see how your annotations compare to her annotations. Then we'll see how well your scoring of it compares to her scoring. And then later on, we'll think about analysis. How well can you analyze what a child's reading process is by looking at their running record? So that will be the first part of this week. The second part of this week is the sample lessons by level. So what the reading recovery people at Clemson have done is they have provided guided reading lessons for all of these levels. Now, caveat, big like wait, hold up. These are not necessarily lessons that you are expected, or any teacher in South Carolina is expected, to take, print out, and then use with a group of children. Because I'm hoping that you've learned that when we have curricula that do that, we are completely ignoring children's needs within that group, right? This is just to give you an idea of what a guided reading lesson could look like traditionally at these levels or that levels or these. These are not necessarily, I mean, you could use some of the ideas in it, but they're not made to be produced and then reproducible across all these different children, all these different schools. One of the major problems that I have with guided reading lessons that are pre-printed, and you just put it to the teacher and say, teach the children, this. Well, no, not until you know the child and the children in that group have similar needs, and then you base your lesson upon their needs, not the other way around. So what I would like for you to do is select the level that you feel like would most closely correlate to a level you're interested in teaching. Now, something to note, you'll see that they're leveled by 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 9, 10, 12. These are reading recovery levels, which in your files, you're going to find a file that correlates reading recovery levels with DRA, with Fountas and Pinnell. So you can see what a level 1, 2 means if the classroom that you're in doesn't use that leveling system. They may use a different one. So you'll see how that correlates. But basically, level 1 to 2 is like, your pre-readers, your emerging readers. When you're going to 17 to 20, you're talking about kids who are basically transitioning up into books where they are pretty fluent reader, pretty fluent and strategic reader. So you'll see that besides level 1 to 2, where they'll be getting a new book every day, you'll see that it goes back and forth day 1, then day 2 for a level 3 to 5 group. Day 1 and then day 2 for level 6 to 9. Some of your readings this week are going to be from a book called Preventing Misguided Reading, and it's a fantastic book, one of my absolute favorites. I think I have it behind me. I'll get it maybe later on. But it's a great book. And one of the greatest things that I learned from it was changing that traditional model of guided reading where we would take one book and we would make that one book last all week long in our guided reading lessons. Which, I mean, not necessarily a bad thing, but if we think to Allington's work and the work of several other researchers, the more that kids are reading, the more they are exposed to those books that they can read with that 98% accuracy, and then maybe a little bit lower accuracy, but they've got your scaffolding and that guided reading, the better they're going to do. So when we just look at just numbers, when you've got kids just reading one book with you throughout 5 days. That's how guided reading used to be when I used to teach. Day 1, I teach this out of that book, then day 2, then day 3, and we would just have that same book. So number-wise, they were getting far fewer exposures to text, which we're wondering why our struggling readers aren't accelerating. Well, if you're only giving them one book a week, it's not enough. So that's why this model has their lessons are what you do on day 1 with the book, and then what you do on day 2, and then you've got a new book on day 3 of your weekday within the school. So that's just something to note as well. So what I want you to do is select one of these. So let's say that you've got a kid that's like a level C or D, which is like a 3 to 5, and they give you the exact procedures of what to do. So before viewing what you're going to do, you're going to read the book and reader characteristics for this kind of a book. Like, what does this kind of a book even look like? And then they're actually going to give you the books to look at. You can click on the hyperlink and look at them so you can see what the text looks like. Um, and then you'll watch the teacher commentary on the book leveling as well as an introduction to the lesson. And then they're going to take you through the parts of a day one guided reading lesson. There'll be a familiar rereading where kiddos are just rereading a book that they've already read before. And then as they're doing that, a teacher's taking a running record. What's the purpose of that? What is the procedure of it? And some questions you consider. So you're going to watch that. Then the teaching point from that running record. So you're just going to follow through this entire table for both the day one lesson that you choose and the day two lesson. And then for your exit slip this week, I want you to talk about what you learned within this kind of a model for guided reading in a day one, day two kind of model. You're not going to be expected to teach a guided reading lesson within this course, but it will be good for you to know, especially for your 2-week plan, what this could look like when we're talking about lesson planning for guided reading. So just that's the main bulk of your work this week, is to choose one of these levels and watch and read everything for the day one and the day two model. If you choose levels 1 through 2, which are the lowest levels, plenty of kiddos need these levels. You'll notice it's just one lesson. And the reason why is because those books are typically very short. And it really doesn't make sense to have children work, 2 days on such a short book. Such a simple book typically. And again, if we're talking about kiddos who are struggling readers and they're down at level 1, 2, let's accelerate them. Let's provide them exposure to lots of books, so 5 books a week or 4 books a week. Let's move that forward. So that is your main task for this week around guided reading. So I will load up, again, for the practice of a running record, I will load up all of the materials that you will need from Clemson in order for you to do that this week. And just keep in mind, as you're practicing next week, week 7, I'm going to ask you to attempt a running record on your own with a kiddo and just see how it goes. So start thinking, which child do I want to choose? Keeping in mind that kiddos get very nervous a lot of the times when they're asked to read to an adult, especially an adult they might not know very well, like you. So you need to start, if you haven't already, building those relationships, just making sure, even though you're a familiar face, that they feel safe, especially if they're a reader who's still emerging in their reading process. That's an important piece. All right, so that's it for this week. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you guys soon.